I'm Denise Lippener. I lead Cherry Becker's state and local advisory practice, and we are thrilled to sponsor NAPA's Grants Management Symposium. For those of you who are not familiar with Cherry Becker, we are one of the top 25 largest accounting firms in the nation. We have over 2,500 associates across the country. And we are focused on grants management, helping organizations ensure that they are properly distributed and used. One thing that we worked with NAPA on to change things up is to move from a virtual environment to now hybrid. So over here, we have over about 20 people who are at NAPA headquarters in person. And we have approximately about 720 people who are joining us virtually. So I think that's awesome. Another thing that we have done is that we wanted to also expand participation to include state and local. And you will see from our panelists that we have that representation now. So I'm really happy about that. And finally, we have also made this CPE worthy. So we have, for people who are participating, you will get 2 CPE credits for joining us. Now, as you probably know, with CPE eligibility, you have to have 8 polling questions. So we will be polling you throughout the session over the next 2 hours to ensure participation. And you have to bear with us. This might seem a little clunky because this is our first time trying this in this type of environment. So please be patient. All right. So we're going to start off with our first 2 polling questions already. Okay. So for those of you joining us virtually, you should be able to see the polling questions pop up on your screen. For those of you who are in person, if you wouldn't mind raising your hands to participate, that would be wonderful. The first question, and I'm going to read the answers first. So to select from, have you heard of the Grants Management Symposium before this session? Now, the choices are yes, no, or unsure. And so if you could raise your hand, if you have heard of GMS before this session, that would be wonderful. All right, great, thank you. And if you have not heard about GMS before this session, awesome, thank you. You're unsure. All right. Oh, okay. All right. Can we move on to the next polling question? All right, so the second polling question is, what is your purpose for joining today's session? And the choices are going to be knowledgeable speakers, you're here for the topic, or you're interested in gaining CPEs. All right, if you could raise your hand if you're here for the knowledgeable speakers. All right, good answer. All right. And well, who's here for the topic? Okay. And who's here for interested in gaining CPEs? Awesome. All right. All right. Are we ready to move on? Okay. So I'm going to pass it back to Joe, who is going to introduce the co-chairs.
Great. Thank you so much. So Dale, I will turn it over to you. I would note that Dale is a recently elected Academy Fellow, so he can never get away from us now. And happy to have you, Dale, here. Dale is currently the Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Office of Grants at the Health and Human Services Department, and he also is the Chair of the Council on Federal Assistance. So Dale, over to you for any remarks. And he's also going to be the moderator of our panel later on. So Dale, I'll turn it to you.
All right. Thanks, Joe. And thanks, everybody. Can you all hear me okay? All right. I am the co-chair of the Council on Federal Financial Assistance. My chair is here, so I wanted to make sure that's clear. Great to see everybody, and so excited about reinvigorating the GMS with the partnership with Cherry Becker. To be able to not only talk about what's going on in the federal government, but then talk to federal stakeholders like John, advocacy groups, and then state and local is just so very important, because this should not be a one-way dialogue. This really needs to be back and forth. So I request that all of you online, please use the chat function or the Q&A function to share your questions so that we can have a dialogue. Our goal is to really engage with the community and get stronger together. So we're going to be going through a number of transition areas, as you know. And what's so great about the Grants Management Symposium is we're about good government and grants, and that doesn't go away. That doesn't change. Perhaps how we go about it is going to be altered from now and then, but the reason we're here is to make sure that we can partner with our communities as best as possible to meet our missions. So again, I thank NAPA, thank Cherry Beckert for the wonderful panel that they've been able to assemble and for the infrastructure and the work that they put into it. So with that, Joe, do I turn it back to you or do we start with Deidre?
Great. I'm just going to just say thank you to Deidre for being here. I was told I need to be in the center of the room. Is this good? Okay. Hi, Andrea. Sorry for Andrea is the co-chair. We've got lots of co-chairs here. Andrea is the co-chair of our Grants Management Symposium, and thank you, Andrea, for all your great work. So yeah, we're excited to have Deidre here as the Deidre is currently the Deputy Controller of the Office of Federal Financial Assistance, issues a lot of policies that are important to our community. And so Deidre, with that, I will turn it over to you for our keynote.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. So very excited to be here today. In particular, I love that it is hybrid, so thank you. It helps to be able to see people, but for all of you online as well, I really do want to try and make this as much of a dialogue as possible, which can be hard to do unless you put those questions in the chat box. So I am going to talk for a few minutes, highlight a number of the things we've been hard at work at, but I think this will be most helpful to you if you get us your questions. If there are questions I can't answer, I also commit to you that I will work with the co-chairs to get those questions answered for you and get back to you. So please, please, please write down your questions, especially about things you don't understand or where you really need our help at ONB in order to implement some of the things we're going to talk through. So as you all know, we have been very, very, very busy over the last couple of years. We've issued a lot of policies, but we've also gotten a lot done. I know the lion's share of today is going to be about the Uniform Grants Guidance, and I promise I will get there. But before I do that, I want to highlight just two quick things that I hope you are tracking because they are areas where I have no doubt we are going to continue to make progress on in the coming months and years. The first is the federal program inventory. If you haven't checked it out, please do go there. Not now, wait till after the panel this afternoon and then check it out. It's fpi.onb.gov, or you can just Google federal program inventory. It is OMB's white whale. We were required over a decade ago to create this list of federal programs and provide in a publicly available way information about whether or not those programs were achieving the goals. We couldn't have got that done without our second accomplishment, which was the creation on the Council of the Council of Federal Financial Assistance, or as mentioned, COFFA, like SOFA. So we created this council in order to bring together agencies and really be able to speak, hopefully, with one voice across the government. And we couldn't have done it without the council. So go check out the federal program inventory. It is because of the council that it is of the quality that it is today. And in the next couple of weeks, you heard it here first. There will be some really exciting updates and changes to that website. So check it out today, but check it out again in the next couple of weeks as we continue to improve it over time. The second thing I want to highlight for you all before we get to the meat of the discussion is right before Thanksgiving, we issued our annual requirements to report on improper payments government-wide. It's something that agencies have been doing for a really long time. We've been tracking them systematically since about 2005, 2006. This year was the lowest level that we've hit in the last decade. It's the second lowest level since 2009. That's because of the hard work of so many federal agencies during the pandemic to really do what they could to make sure that they were paying the right people the right amount and at the right time. That's not to say there aren't challenges. That's not to say there's not more work to be done, but we are making progress in very important areas, and agencies are doing an excellent job doing those risk assessments that are so important to identify what controls they can put into place to learn from the lessons of other programs and to really prevent improper payments moving forward. So if you go to the OMB blog, you can check it out there. We talk a little bit about the results, or you can go to paymentAccuracy.gov where you can find all of the information about all of the programs. It's a really big win and important work that could not have been done without the hard work of so many agencies government-wide. But why are we here today? Because in case you missed it, which I'm sure none of you did, we rewrote the Uniform Grants Guidance. It was a big body of work, something that took a large portion of my very small team's time over the last 2 years. We rewrote it from top to bottom because we had a couple of really important goals that we were trying to hit. The first being we needed to make sure that the guidance was clear. If we weren't being clear about the expectations we were setting about for our grant recipients, how could we ensure that they were following them? We also had been hearing really loud and clear that certain sections of the Uniform Grants Guidance were either being misunderstood or, quite frankly, being interpreted in very different ways by programs. And that meant that recipients were often hearing conflicting information from their programs. This cost is allowable, this cost isn't allowable. Two different programs looking at the same sentence and making a very, very different interpretation. Third, we hadn't updated some of those thresholds or some of those triggers, one might call them, about requirements that recipients have to follow in a really long time, in some cases ever. And we needed to make sure that we were coming to date as close as we could with reality. And the last thing we needed to do while we were getting all of that right is make sure that we were getting the balance of oversight. We couldn't just reduce burden and make sure that it was easier, but also not at the same time make sure that we were going to have in place everything that was necessary to continue to oversee whether or not these federal dollars were being spent right. We couldn't be more proud of the feedback that we got and were able to incorporate. I know many of you helped to create that feedback for us. In the room with me today is Steve Mackey, who was the one that led that process. He himself reviewed your thousands of comments, and yes, there were thousands of them. And yes, they all made the Uniform Grants Guidance better. We reviewed every single comment, and I've never said this and meant it more in my life, but you should read the preamble to the Uniform Grants Guidance. It's the document that comes out in the Federal Register that tells you why you make the changes that you make. Many of you asked us questions or pointed to things that you really wanted done. And in that preamble, we have addressed all of them. And if you have a question or a comment that you put in that you don't think is being addressed there, you should reach out to us and we'll be happy to explain what we did and why. So a couple of the big changes, we put it into plain language. I have been known to be said many times, I chose a long time ago not to be a lawyer. And I don't think that I should have to be a lawyer in order to understand the Uniform Grants Guidance. So we did our level best. But that being said, Steve has spent more time with the lawyers during the last 2 years than I think he knew he signed himself up for in order to get a document that really got that balance right. Because at the end of the day, it is setting out requirements. We also went through every single threshold in the guidance document, and wherever we were legally able, we made changes consistent with either inflation or reality. Probably the biggest changes we made was the increase in the de minimis cost rate, which helped so many recipients go from 10 to 15%. We also looked at the single audit and the thresholds there for what triggered that requirement, and we increased that to $1 million. There are a number of other thresholds that seem small, like how we define equipment, but at the end of the day, we are confident are going to make a real impact for recipients and reduce burden. Other areas where we thought about reducing burden was, quite frankly, if you don't know whether or not you're eligible, it's really hard to get your foot in the door when it comes to federal financial assistance. And so with the help of our HHS partners, we blew up the old appendix on how you write a notice of funding opportunity and started over and created a whole new one, a whole new guide about how one thinks about it. We also, which we'll talk about in a minute, have followed the lead of our HHS partners and taken to simplifying NOFOs across the board. And so we'll talk about that in just a second. As I mentioned, we clarified a lot of the existing guidance. And so one of the things you're going to talk about today is how state and local governments can use federal funds to build data systems to make sure that you're able to really track and evaluate whether or not your programs are delivering the benefits that are so needed. And those costs have always been allowable. We made it really clear in this guidance exactly which types of costs are allowable. I will tell you at the end of the day, it is still going to be hard work for all of you to get that right. Some of it is going to be a series of conversations you need to have with your individual program folks. But if anyone is unsure, you've heard it here from ONB, those costs are allowable and in fact encouraged. We want you all to be able to evaluate your programs, and we know you can't do that unless you have data systems and structures and processes in place to do that evaluation. Last but not least, when it comes to the uniform grants guidance, if you have questions or don't know what to do or don't understand or don't have the right program person, the first place I'm going to direct you to is COFFA.gov. COFFA.gov. It is our website for the Council on Federal Financial Assistance. And there we have a page dedicated to the Uniform Grants Guidance. We are putting up all of the information that we are being asked for. We are trying to be as transparent as possible. So 2 things, go and look and see what's there. There's a lot of really good stuff. There's additional implementation guidance for agencies. There's FAQs. There's a red line from the old version. There's an Excel file that takes each section and explains to you what changed. We're working on a number of other things, but go check it out. And if there are things that are missing that you're like, my life would be so much easier if only we had X, let us know. There's a email address there. Please do email us. It comes directly to Steve and I. Yes, I get the emails personally. And for those of you, and there are many of you who have reached out to me personally, you know that I'm going to get back to you. I might not have the right answer at that moment. I might not even be the right person, but I won't let your email go unanswered. I will put you in contact with the right person. So please, please, please find us at ONB, either directly. Steve or I are happy to take your emails directly, or via our support boxes. You'll find them on that COFFA website. Please do email and reach out. Did you want to do a question?
Yeah.
Yep.
Are you done? Thank
No,
you so much.
I
Oh,
ha-
you're not?
Oh, I thought you
done?
wanted. No.
I can do a question.
Okay, sorry. You're good.
Can I do a question?
Sure.
Well, that messes up. I'll do a question. So question, how familiar are you with the COFFA? 3 answers, very familiar, still learning, or all new to me. Those of you who are very familiar with the COFFA, please raise your hand. Okay, awesome. Still learning. Okay, looks like the majority is still learning and all new to me. All right, great. Thank you so much for that break.
All right. Well, that's perfect because
Yeah.
now we're going to talk about the COFFA.
There you go.
So that's the Uniform Grants Guidance. Find us. But what is the COFFA? Dale and I are co-chairs. Probably been the best pleasure I've had in the last 2 years getting to work more closely with Dale.
Oh, please.
He's an amazing partner, and I couldn't have done it without him. But what is the COFFA? The COFFA represents all 52 grant-making agencies in the federal government. It is how we are going to come together and deliver federal financial assistance as one government. Our recipients tell us over and over again, we don't think about the federal government as a bunch of individual programs who have different rules or authorities. We think about getting money from one place. And while I want that to be the case, it's just not true. Every program does have underlying statutes and authorities. But what we can do is make sure that as agencies and programs, we're talking to each other and we're sharing, these are the decisions we're making about our programs and why. And this is how we can work together so that way our recipients, which are many that receive funding from multiple programs, can have a similar experience regardless of what agency or program they're working with. So what is the COFFA specifically? Each of our CFO Act agencies, so each of our big agencies identified a senior financial accountable official. That individual is responsible for really doing the coordination internal to their agency. So that way, when they come to our meetings, they are really representing all of the programs that they represent. We get together probably more often than they would like, at least monthly. Just the SFAOs get together and identify, here are the challenges, here are the things we want to work on across all agencies. We get together another time in the month and we open it up to the entire grants management community. And we talk about, these are the issues that as a community we are trying to address and how we can solve them together. And we are hopefully next month going to have our first public meeting where we are inviting the public to come in and hear about, here are the exciting things going on in our grants management space that we want to be sharing with you. So we're 1 year out. Just last month, Dale and I got to celebrate the COFFA in the Indian Treaty Room at the White House, and we got to talk about all of the work that we did during our first year in existence. I mentioned earlier NOFO simplification. So HHS had really led the way here. They understood that if we want to get grant recipients that know how to really succeed at the programs that they're going to be applying for, it was critical that the announcements were clear and were also able to be read and understood by everyone. And so as a federal government, we have been hard at work identifying for each agency a set of NOFOs that this year they are committed to simplifying. Now, that number is only in the hundreds, and we know that there are thousands of NOFOs that go out every year. But this year is a critical year because those hundreds of NOFOs government-wide are going to teach our agencies how to write NOFOs in a more simplified, straightforward manner in 2026 and beyond. So this is a really critical year. Because of the leadership of HHS, we've been able to roll this out much faster than I think anyone thought was originally possible. We're doing trainings, we're sharing best practices, and we're really figuring out together how to simplify NOFOs across the board throughout the federal government. We've also been focused on workforce development. Our folks have said that it is often the case if you are a grants manager at one agency in one program, that might not translate to being a grants manager at another agency or another program. And while it's certainly the case you're going to need to be specialized based on the specifics of a program, it should be the case where there's a more consistent set of expectations kind of across the board. And so we're working hard to identify what those core competencies are, but also to make sure that we can create one training that can get us 95% of the way there for all programs. So that way our agencies don't have to keep reinventing the wheel every time. Probably the nerdiest, but the one that gets me the most excited about is data standards. We know at the end of the day, if we are going to be able to get things done, we have to speak in a consistent voice. That is true for when we are presenting data publicly, but also when we're asking questions of recipients. If I ask you for your address, I need to ask you for it in the same way. So that way you send me your zip code with or without those extra 4 digits. So that way, when I am trying to figure out, are you the same recipient at another program, I don't have 2 different addresses for the same person because I just asked the question differently. That data standards work is hard, it's nerdy, and it's long, but we are well underway, and I have no doubt that when we get through it, it's going to make a really, really big difference. There are a number of other things that we have focused on, but I would say probably the most important is building community. We have figured out how, as a federal government, to talk to each other and raise questions and raise problems. So, for example, there have been a number of disasters recently that have resulted in some real impacts to recipients and locations. It used to be the case that only ONB could really think about it government-wide and try and understand what should be done. But now our agency partners are able to come together, put a meeting on the calendar, have a conversation and say, what are we seeing on the ground with our recipients? This is what we're doing and why. And our other agency partners are able to learn from that. That sense of community is real. That sense of community is what's going to allow us to continue to implement not only in a consistent way, but also to ensure that we are able to do it while reducing burden and making sure that we're also providing the appropriate oversight. So I talked a few more minutes than I was probably supposed to because we only have about 5 more minutes for questions, but I do want to open it up for questions and see what folks would like to hear more about. But I really did mean it what I said at the top. If your question doesn't get answered, send it our way and we will make sure that we get it answered for you. So do open up
Yes,
for questions?
We do have a few questions. Oh, I have polling questions first before we get to your questions. The first one is, do you believe that there is a need for a COFFA-like group in your government? The choices are yes, no, and unsure. So, do you believe that there is a need for a COFFA-like group in your government? Those who think yes, please raise your hands. Great. It's about a majority. And then no? Okay, no one answered no and unsure. All right.
That's been convincing.
Yes, you're very convincing. Thank
I was
you
gonna
very
wait for the
much.
person who said no.
And then I was gonna say, we should talk outside for a minute.
Okay, and then we have a polling question, number 5. How familiar are you with the uniform guidance or the field guide? The selections are very familiar, still learning, or all new to me. So familiarity with the uniform guidance or the field guide. Those of you who are very familiar, please raise your hand. Right, that's a lot of you here. Still learning. All right. And all new to me. All right, everyone is at least familiar with this. Okay. And now we will move on to questions from the audience. When will facts be published and can you preview the format and contents? Thank you for the thank you, Hai, for the question. Yeah, thanks, Hai.
Sure. So we are not issuing new frequently asked questions. I've said this dozens of times. I think people don't believe me when I say that. We have issued implementation guidance. We are answering questions in a variety of formats, but we are not issuing new frequently asked questions. I don't actually think they're a very effective way to get people's questions answered because you have to first understand explicitly what the question meant and then explicitly what the answer means relative to the question. If you get any of that wrong, there's a lot of room for misunderstanding. I do believe that's skill trend. That being said, there are FAQs that many of you love and use and point to better understand the uniform grants guidance. So what we will be doing is taking the existing uniform grants guidance, and I hope this is days and not weeks, but don't hold me to that, but days and not weeks, hopefully. You will see the FAQs updated to be deleted if it's no longer correct or necessary because it's answer a question about a policy that no longer exists because we've changed it, or edited to be correct, right? So we will get rid of the ones that are no longer relevant. We will update them if there's anything that's wrong, and there will be a new version of the old FAQs, but we will not be creating new FAQs. If you have questions that are not answered, see earlier comment. Reach out to us, let us know. We will find the right way to make sure that everyone understands what the answer is, but FAQs are not going to be what we are going to use moving forward.
Thank you so much, Deidre. We have 2 more questions from Laura. So thank you, Laura, very much for those questions. One is talking about dealing with static budgets at the state level and how to justify them when dealing with grant applications when there's a difference between thresholds for, say, equipment at the state level and how to rationalize that with federal applications. So if you don't know, that's something we could always answer offline as well. And the other was regarding the de minimis rate. Are there state, local, tribal, and territorial governments allowed to use the de minimis rate if they never had a NCRA before?
Yes. Yes, everyone is eligible to use the de minimis rate for all new awards issued on or after October 1st, 2025. That new de minimis is in effect government-wide, right? So for all for all recipients that is eligible. The first question, I'm not exactly sure I'm tracking, so we may want to do a follow-up with them about what specifically we can help when it comes to fixed budgets or steady budgets.
We'll follow up with that offline. Thank you so much.
All right, question in the audience. Or Kat.
So you were talking about how you were going to have an open meeting in a month or so.
Yep.
So where can we get information on that meeting? And do you guys have any place on your website where people can subscribe for updates and things like that?
So COFFA.gov is the place to go. There's an email address there, which is our COFFA support inbox. When we get final sign off to have that meeting, that's where we will announce it, and that's where you will go and register for it. But COFFA.gov, that we also have a newsletter and some other things. So if you are not hearing from us, you should go there and send an email to that inbox, and we'll make sure that we are tracking you, and you'll be alerted when we finalize the date and times for upcoming meetings and conversations.
All right, any other questions in the audience? key takeaway, it goes back to the COFFA. It's yet another reason why we should all be sure that we need such an institution. So the Academy recently did a uniform field guidance document study that I will ask Brenna Isman, who's the Director of Academy Studies, to talk briefly about, and then we'll turn it over to the study team that did that work. Brenna.
Thanks, Joe. I'm going to keep my remarks real quick. Want to introduce Perry. But before I do, I also wanted to thank all of the folks that were involved in this. Obviously, Perry Sabity and Kathy Stack and Mary Ellen Wiggins and our Academy study team. We had Jonathan Garcia and Erica Cintron and Caitlin Bloom that all helped coordinate and operationalize a lot of this work. And again, we'll get into this really quickly, but I did just wanted to say how grateful we were for the opportunity to partner on this. I think it really pulls together a bunch of different strands of work that we do here. Obviously, the Grants Management Symposium is a great example, thinking about the work that the CIP has done around modernizing benefit delivery at the state and local level. Our grand challenge to modernize and reinvigorate the public service for sure. And then thinking about 10 years ago when I first got the opportunity to meet Kathy when she was over at OMB, and we were working with them on the Partnership Fund for Program Integrity and Innovation. I had to remind myself of that name. But this was a lot of the things that we were talking about then at that time. We've been able to see the progress that's been made and see how it's been modernized in the way we're doing things. So it's been a real honor and great opportunity to work on this. And I will introduce Perry and hand the mic right over. Perry Sabity is a senior grants advisor for U.S. Digital Response, working with hundreds of communities using USDR's free grant finding and reporting tools. She comes to this work after over 25 years of experience as a CFO in government and higher education and serving as a cabinet member and senior executive staff to 2 governors. She and the other authors, as I mentioned, Kathy and Mary Ellen, along with several major contributors like Robert Shea, helped develop the Academy's field guide. Perry was elected as an Academy Fellow, as we had mentioned, along with Andrea and Dale this year. So it was a great bumper crop. So thanks so much. Looking forward to hearing more about this.
Thanks for warming that up.
I tried.
See you later.
Yes. Yeah, because I'm going to ask you. That's right. So let me introduce my partner in work here. I was going to say something else, but probably not. Okay. So thank you very much, Brenna, for that kind introduction, and the support of the NAPA team has been absolutely fabulous for getting this project through the end zone. We actually managed to do it. I'm very excited. I do want to introduce Kathy Stack, who is my fearless leader and co-author. Anyone who's met Kathy knows you're part of her network and you'll work your fingers to the bone making something happen. And that is indeed what we've done. Also, Robert Shea, who really helped us immensely with our federal approach. So our job here was to think about the improvements that Deirdre talked about in terms of restating the OMB guidance in plain language, as well as providing new insights into how you can use indirect cost, direct costing, and allocation plans to pay for integrated data systems. So we set for ourselves the challenge of, could we build a field guide for this that would help people navigate through a very complex area? And when I heard about field guide, I thought, 10, 15 pages. Well, 81 pages later, I think we've got it done. So let's talk a little bit about this. And for those of you that are tuning in virtually, one of the things I want to focus on here is, we have 2 types of people who are interested in grants management. We have people that give away money. So program managers that are giving away money in grant form to many, many governments and other subrecipients. And we have grant managers themselves that are trying to manage the assets as much as they can and as efficiently as they can. Now, why are integrated data systems not strictly speaking grants management systems, but integrated data systems important to both these groups. It's because they combine administrative data from different domains that enable you to manage costs, often find fraud and overpayments, deploy powerful analytics, and do some robust evaluations. And it is for this reason that I think Kathy, in her time at OMB, Deirdre has picked up the flag since then, have really focused on IDS as an important instrument for state and local governments in better deploying grant resources.
And I think it's useful to clarify that the kinds of systems we're looking at are people-based. So it's not just financial systems. It's like, what are the people who are being served by many different programs, where if you can bring the data together and create the linkage across programs, you can get a much better understanding of what their needs are, what services they're getting, and what their outcomes are.
Yeah. So in order to provide clarity to everybody, let's look at what the guidance actually enables you to do. And for many federal and local folks that are listening in virtually, it is very clear in the guidance that data costs may be charged to grants as eligible direct and indirect costs. This may differ agency to agency, but the OMB has been extremely clear about that definition. And so what that means is costs to gather, store, track, manage, analyze, disaggregate. It is very clear about all the ways you can use data. Also, evaluation costs may be charged to grants as direct and indirect costs. And this should be a real shot in the arm for enterprise-wide evaluation efforts. We became acquainted with the case of Tennessee, which has really implemented a remarkable statewide performance evaluation effort where they're looking at many different areas in turn across their state in order to assess the most effective way to run programs and to monitor the outcomes that are being achieved. So let's take a look at what one of these state systems might look like. This is the state of Arkansas. This system supports over 20 lines of service. I'll explain what those are in the next slide, across over 15 different federal and state programs. So if you look in the circles here, you'll see it combines workforce data, education data, human services, public safety, and interestingly, vital records, births and deaths, driver's license, occupational licenses. So it's an extremely wide-ranging data set and shares, as Kathy points out, the administrative data, the data on beneficiaries and individuals across all of those programs. Now, what's truly mind-boggling is if you look at the next slide, this shows you how the state of Arkansas must see its way through an extraordinarily complex cost allocation system to get this system financed. This particular system is financed with no state resources, only federal resources. So they use what I would call an all of the above approach. They use direct costing, they use indirect costing, and they use the statewide cost allocation system to finance various aspects of their integrated data system. If you look here, the column on the left are the services they provide, and you can see those services run the gamut from artificial intelligence and data analytics to providing digital credentials and that kind of thing. They then think about how they might allocate those costs. Is it a chargeback? Is it part of their allocation plan? And then finally, they actually recover those costs against grants. So this is super complex, and difficult for many states to see their way through. So we thought it was important to build a simple field guide to help people through this. And so we did so. So what's in the field guide? we have an entire chapter on what federal programs you can look to that support integrated data systems and evaluation. We have a whole chapter on methods of financing these systems using federal funds. We've included a chapter on preparing for audits because the single audit is something that often stands in the way of adopting a new way in which you can allocate costs. You know, if we haven't done it before, why should we do it in the future? So you got to think about that. And we have lots of examples of state and local integrated data systems. To give you an example of how we've tried to make this simple, we actually have built in a decision tree here that any person using this guide can use to determine what method of cost allocation you should be using for a particular component, phase, or service within your integrated data system that you may want to allocate costs for. Lastly, so I told you a bit about the communities. I will wrap it up with a few comments about some of the challenges that we ran across as we were putting together this field guide. First of all, this field guide was very complex to put together, and there are a lot of conflicting rule sets. So we put the guide up in draft form on the NAPA website. And I think that the link will be put into the comments in the chat, if that's physically possible by somebody. But many of you online, as well as those of you in the room, actually know more about this than we do. So please read the field guide, and if there's something in there we need to fix, press the submit button at the bottom of the website and tell us how to fix it. Then take some action to ease navigation. Really think about the way Deirdre modeled for us today in her presentation. How are we driving for consistency? How are we building incentives for shared infrastructure? And how are we doing so using two-way communication? I'm going to tell you what I think. You're going to tell me what that means to you. And lastly, simplify. And I think I'm going to turn this over to Kathy to talk a little bit about simplification, you know, working on toolkits and other automated tools, but then also some other funding ideas. Kathy?
So yeah, we realized that there was sort of two categories of future work. One is helping collectively, federal, state, local, cross-agency, helping people navigate existing rules, which are just really, really hard and confusing. And then there's what could we do to simplify this? So I think there's about 40 pages, right, in the plain language document that explains indirect costs, direct costs, cost allocations. It's really complicated. And the question is, does it have to be? Because a lot of the rules that have been set up, they were created by people, like, you know, decades ago. And there may actually be ways of simplifying it if we can get the right people working together and thinking a little bit about the out of the box. Instead of at the federal level, you tend to think about things in your programmatic silo, your agency lane. But what we've discovered is the folks in the state and local level that are bringing all of this data together and figuring out how to tap into different funding streams, that's a gold mine of insights. And if we could, at the federal level, step back and say, what can we do to simplify our rules to make that easier? And there's one particular precedent from 20 years ago that I think is key. It's HHS. And it's not even in Dale's world, probably, but it's the Cost Allocation Methodologies Toolkit, where CMS, Administration on Children and Families, and Food and Nutrition Service got together in 2003 with Kansas and Texas and auditors and came up with a standard simplified cost allocation toolkit where they made up simpler rules that with an Excel sheet and some common sense, they could create a safe harbor for every state that wanted to allocate its costs and have it something that the auditors would accept and all those agencies would accept. We've got a whole bunch of agencies that are dying to combine their funding, and they're dying for federal help on how to do it in ways that they won't get their hands slapped or have to turn money back for auditors. So anyway.
All right. Thank you so much, Perry and Kathy. We really appreciate your insights into this area. We have quite a few questions actually, but we are going to defer them to the end of this session to ensure we have enough time, if that's okay. All right, so we do have polling question. Our next polling question, question number 6 is, how likely are you to review the Academy's product or use it in your work? And for those in the audience here, you can close your eyes when you answer so that you're not offending anybody. Okay, the answers are very likely, not needed for us, or unsure. All right, so if you're likely to review the Academy's product or use it in your work, how many are very likely to do so? Awesome, thank you. Not needed for us. All right, and unsure. All right. All right, so now I'm going to hand it over to Dale, who is going to moderate our roundtable. Dale?
So thank you, Denise. Appreciate the polling. I think it's important that we get people involved. And with that, I'd like our panelists to join Perry on the DS, please. Please. And now I've got my mic on. Sorry about that. All right. So as I said before, how wonderful to have different perspectives all in the same room responding to this type of federal information. And we're fortunate to have a federal representative, a state representative, a county representative, and a public service organization. So colleagues, I'm going to just start with a basic question, which is, who are you? What do you do? And tell me how you all interact with federal policy. How do you operationalize it? I'm going to be pretty tight on the timing just so we can get all through, but that's my triple header question. Who are you? What do you do? And tell me about how you operationalize federal policy. And I think I'm going to start with you, John.
Okay. My name is John Muckey. I'm the Deputy Director for the Veterans Cemetery Grant Program. It's a capital grant type program where we build capital structures, cemeteries, basically. One of the biggest things that we had that I noticed with the current organization, I just got there in January, but they had set up a grants management service because each of our individuals, like it was discussed earlier, they get kind of siloed. And so each one of our organizations that manage grants is kind of managing, they're kind of doing their own thing, right? So what they did was they stood up a grant management service that's now doing oversight of all the individual grant management staff and helping them to better comply with the uniform guidance. When I got there, I found documents that were still being used that contain things like you need to follow the single audit guidance that's located in VA's book, right? It's like, guys, that went away like 2014 or 15, you know? So, you know, we had to take some of that stuff out of there when I got there, and I'm still working their documents, but it's quite eye-opening. I came from DOE, Department of Energy, and I was over there for about 15 years managing low-income weatherization grants as a project manager. So over there, we were a little bit more progressive per se, but VA needs some help, so that's what I'm here to do. That's what
it has a lot of opportunity, is the language.
A lot of opportunity. There you go. A lot of opportunity for improvement.
All right, thank you, John. Stacy, same question. Who are you? What do you do, and how do you operationalize federal policy in your environment?
All right, so my name is Stacy Massey. I'm Deputy Director of Grants and Financial Reporting for the state of Ohio, Office of Budget and Management. And what I do within my organization, at least on one half on the grant space, is I've created a community of practice within Ohio, similar to the COFFA, called the Ohio Grants Partnership. And we are trying to streamline grants across the state and make sure that not only state agency partners, but our local government partners can build grant capacity. So yeah, we are trying to do that in the state of Ohio, and how really policies like the uniform guidance really impact us on our, you know, kind of building that into our policies and processes and procedures is how we operate and how we become efficient, but also making sure our subrecipients are aware of what what they need to be doing as well, because that's kind of a blind spot that we need to make sure that we're on top of. But the state of Ohio, and why it's really important, the state of Ohio last year, 2024, spent $44 billion in federal funding, which makes up about 42% of the state's budget. So federal grants are significantly important to the state. It makes up a significant about 726.4 million in just direct personnel costs, not to include all the indirects that are supporting personnel within the state. I think there's over 800 folks that touch grants in some capacity at the state level. So it's really important that we work on policies and we understand them and we build them into our process.
Thank you, Stacy. Okay, Raphael. If you were a fish, what would you be and why? No, actually, we're going to go back to the regular one. So name, role, and then how you operationalize policy.
Great, thank you. My name is Raphael Murphy. I'm the director of the Office of Grants Management in Montgomery County, Maryland, just about 10 stops up the red line from here. And we are a new entity within county government that established a couple years ago to implement best practices on grants that we receive, as well as grants that we give out to our community partners. So in terms of how we interact with federal policies, it's really our guidepost. It's our Bible, so to speak. We do not want to have any audits go bad. We do not want to break any regulations. The challenge that we have in Montgomery County government is that we're a comparatively wealthy county that hasn't had to rely on federal funding to operate their programs and services. Now, as we become more reliant, it's a challenge within county government to really understand rules, regulations of how federal grants work, because we've never had to internalize those as part of county operations. So that's why my office was established, and that's what we're working towards.
All right. Thank you, Raphael. Perry, we've already heard your pitch. So I guess the question for you, though, is are there any other parts of the uniform guidance that have helped you and Kathy and Robert in the development of your product, in addition just to the clarification around allowability of costs?
I would say by far the most amazing thing is rewriting it in plain language and thinking about simplification of the NOFOs. So at USDR, I work with people that are seeking grants and simplifying NOFOs and allowing a grant seeker to see in the first page of an executive summary whether they might be eligible, rather than making their way through 125 pages of single space text before they figure that out. Absolutely revolutionary.
Amen.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you. Well, so so what we've heard is oversight structures that can ensure compliance and support, governance as a way to make sure everybody's aware about the opportunities with policies. And then, of course, Raphael described it as a guidepost, as a fundamental component from which the way in which we interact with the federal government flows. So, all right, appreciate that. Thank you. So we're going to get into some more specifics. And Perry, you kind of hit it already, which is tell us about some of the benefits. So we've heard about the importance of plain language, not in just how we speak through these policy documents, but also things like simplifying NOFOs. What are the other major benefits that you all have seen as you have wrestled with the uniform guidance during your implementation? Raphael, why don't we start with you?
I mean, again, the clarity and some plain language is great, but like some other things to focus on, I think the directness, and that came up in the earlier presentations, is essential. Just being very direct on what the policy is. That is huge. We sub-implement a lot of our programs. And so if it's barely clear to us or fuzzy, then for our nonprofit partners, it's not going to be clear to them. So that not only helps us translate the rules, us understand the rules, but translate to our partners who are going to actually implement the program later on. The de minimis increase, we cannot say how huge that's been for a lot of organizations and for ourselves to make sure that we have that extra, those underlying costs available to us, or the funds available to us to cover those costs of implementation. So those have been two huge ones, but really just the clarity has been huge because that helps us just translate those rules or pass those rules on more easily down to our partners.
Great, thank you. John, how about you?
Well,
Well, that's a long pause, John.
yeah. Again, I think I get back to the clarification of the language, being not an auditor, that's not the right word, a monitor for DOE. We often had conflicts, and like Deidre said, they had grantees come to me. I'd ask them a question on a monitoring visit, and they'd say, "Oh, well, we replied to it like this," and I said, "That's totally the wrong interpretation. Where'd you get that?" "Oh, we got it from HHS last time they were out here." So
I deny that, John.
Priority time.
Right, right. Previous leadership, yeah.
The previous one. They got it from a previous monitor, from a different federal agency. I said, but they had convinced them that the grantee had convinced the other monitor, that was the correct interpretation, and the other monitor just agreed with it. But the language, I agree that clarification of language is a big help, getting everyone on the same page. What does this mean, right? Okay, we're good?
That's good. Thank you. Stacy, what's your take on the benefits that you've seen in your work?
Of the changes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I will say I want to applaud HHS for, I mean, making.
See, John, you can.
Making the uniform guidance uniform and really adopting it in the coming, soon. So I think that's important because living under kind of some exceptions and trying to figure what those out makes it difficult for folks like myself who are trying to streamline across the state when there are all of these exceptions and it's not uniform. So I do applaud you for that. So, but I feel like a lot of the changes, they're added clarity. Data and evaluation, which we've talked a lot about today, I think is really critical that now is kind of front and center as allowable. That has been, performance metrics have been like the elephant in the room for years, where everyone knows that they need to start figuring out if there are outcomes, what the cost benefit is to programs, and funding where there is the greatest need. But doing that, it has been a challenge, and getting, funding to support the data systems that you need to do to figure that out is also important. I also think that there's a role as we move more into more technical uses of administering funding for using data analytics to kind of reduce monitoring burden on folks. And that again, now this kind of shows it front and center that that's a fundable thing. But I will say some of the other things that we talked about really help our subrecipient community, increasing the de minimis to 15, the supply and equipment thresholds. The single audit threshold to $1 million really helps our local government partners. That didn't really move the needle for the state at all, of course. I just said 44 billion, but it does help us in maybe monitoring single audits, a few less single audits, although there was some language added for more robust monitoring. So I don't know if that really did too much, but the increase in the fixed amount subaward, I think, is pretty critical, because I think more folks are going to start using that vehicle in subgranting.
And that's an excellent topic, because there's always that trade-off. The great thing about a fixed award amount is that you are paying for the results, right? The product or what is delivered. And the oversight community isn't crazy about that. It's not the way we typically do business. So there is an interesting tension still going on, but I do believe that particularly for the newest folks coming into the federal environment, if you did a small fixed award amount, that could give them the opportunity to participate without necessarily the same level of burden. But I'm sure that exquisite tension is going to continue to go back and forth.
Well, we all like to see actual costs and only fund actual costs, right? But I do know that you have a lot of smaller not-for-profits in particular that are the boots on the ground getting a lot of this federal program work done. And states pass that through. I think we pass through almost 20% just for those folks to get work done. And that makes it more palatable for those folks to actually do these programs and not have to worry about some of the other tracking and other requirements. So I like the fact it was increased a little bit.
Yeah.
And I do hope that folks start to use that vehicle a little bit more frequently.
Right, because it's adopted in pockets, particularly in SBIR programs, small business innovation research. But there is great opportunity there, particularly with the newer folks coming into the government. Raphael, what are you thinking about benefits?
Again, like the simplification.
Oh, right. I already hit you up, didn't I?
Yeah.
Oh, I just kept doing the circle. Perry, I think that you're up then. Are there other benefits that you've seen in there?
I think actually you've already hit me up.
All right,
So
okay.
go for it.
Well, let's go on to challenges then. As OMB has described, this is a work in progress. You are never done with these types of things, and often you end up storing a lot of changes that you want to implement, and then you do it all at once, and you don't always get everything in there. So this is kind of a combined question. I mean, what is it that what are the challenges with implementing 2 CFR 200, and what else do you want to see in 2 CFR 200? So let's go with John.
Okay, one of the biggest challenges that I've run into is again non-clarity of language before. Now the language is clear, but then now the language is clear, but then when you go to talk to somebody, people tend to get set in their ways and do things year after year after year. And when you tell them they can't do that anymore because of they can't do it anymore, it's like, I've been doing this for 30 years. I ran into a situation just the other day, and I said, well, I'm sorry, but we can't do that anymore. We can't pay you that way anymore, and we're gonna have to start paying you this way. And there was there's a little bit of discussion, and I said it's in the regulation, but then within a couple of days, everything worked itself out, and we're back on the road, right? So it's people that are set in their ways, hard to change, right? It's always hard to change when you've got all this stuff in place and you know exactly how it's going to work, and now you kind of upset their apple cart. So you just have to talk through it and support them as much as possible.
So there's a change management element. So it may be clear now, but that doesn't mean everybody's adopting. Later on, I'm going to ask you a question about what resources are available, and maybe we could talk a little bit about how we can look for examples for good change management in policy implementation. Stacey, you're up. So tell us the challenges, your hopes, dreams, and fears.
Okay,
What is
well,
it that what is it
much
could be
time we
done?
have on my dreams here, but what I want to see, I can talk challenges first. So I will say that there are a lot of minor changes within the uniform guidance which would impact policies and procedures, and where folks need to kind of drill in and figure out where those need to be made, I think becomes a little bit challenging, especially across the state, to make sure everybody's being consistent. Some of the things such as informing employees in writing the whistleblower rights and protections, just tiny things that were in there, the cybersecurity and internal controls. And one of the biggest challenges have been for Ohio is there was now the requirement that financial certifications, when applying for funds, requesting payment, and submitting financial reports, are being those certifications are being received by the pass-through entity. A lot of state agencies within Ohio have built systems to do cash draws and that for their sub-recipients, and now those systems have to have those certifications built within them. So it's these tiny little things that they seem very minuscule, maybe in writing, or very simple, but then when you start to put them into practice and kind of bake them into your procedures, it could be a little bit more of a change than you were expecting. And then really, I guess, making sure our pass-through entities are educated on what all of the changes are and what the requirements are. That's pretty critical. That's where my Ohio Grants Partnership kind of comes into play. We do sessions. We just did an Ohio Grants Summit, and I did a session on uniform guidance changes, just trying to educate our community on what they need to be doing to update their policies and procedures and align to the new guidance, plus managing 2 guidances at once, which sometimes that could be a little tricky.
Right.
But okay, so my wishes. So
Dear Santa.
define beneficiary. I know that came out during the pandemic. That's now never going to go away. We've got sub-recipients, we got contractors. We now have this third bucket called beneficiaries. What does that look like? What does that mean? I know that was thought through when the uniform guidance was updated and not addressed, but it's continuing to spin people out of control on defining it themselves. So that's my number one wish on my Christmas list. Again, the clarity on the fixed amount subawards or deliverable based approach, like you said, there still seems to be uncertainty. I think there's some language in the uniform guidance that suggests that certifications, when folks request money on a fixed amount subaward, align to the cost principles. But yet the new language kind of speaks to, it kind of contradicts and says these are deliverable based and you don't have to have actual costs monitored. So that's that clarity. And then really my third wish, and this is just where changes are made, and there was one made on pension and to CFR 200.431 around fringe costs. I know that pension language was very problematic. It was changed after a lot of discussion, but it is still creating some uncertainty and some confusion with a couple federal agencies that don't seem to understand that. So really having everybody on the same page with the language changes is really my wish, but that's like a big wish list, I know.
Well, I'm glad you said it, and our OMB colleagues would be happy to take that under consideration as we get into kind of a battle rhythm, like a dynamic policy environment where we issue, we hear, we discuss, we revise, we issue again. So you can catch the next wave, so to speak, on that. Perry, challenges.
So I think I'm gonna riff off of where Stacy started, but my first priority challenge is around auditing and the compliance supplement. So we've issued guidance, we've changed that guidance, and I'm a former auditor. I know how auditors operate. We do what we are told to do. So now the federal government has spoken with one voice about the eligibility of certain costs, with the exception of the word beneficiary.
Well, you can define it yourself right now.
That's right, exactly. So having said that, right, the compliance supplement needs to be as clear about these changed rules and really needs to be, in a sense, rethought in the same way this was written in plain language, made easy to understand by people implementing these methodologies, because only when they understand the risks that auditors are looking for will they develop the processes they should in order to offset that risk. Right now, the process they develop is, I'll do it the same way I did it last year, right? Because that's the least risky method to proceed. So that would be really high on my list. The second is and you touched on this, agency consistency. And I think COFFA's in a great position to help with this. How are we making sure that every agency, from the EPA to education, is reading the guidance, absorbing the guidance, and changing their own grant text and eligibility criteria to reflect the management priorities of OMB? I think that's absolutely critical. And then the last one, can I go on?
You can.
Okay. My
Wait,
last
time's up.
wish.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Okay, so because I put them in order of
I
priority.
appreciate it.
Right. So my last wish is around administrative burden. Okay, now what do I mean by that? I am actually going to point to cost allocation plans, agency cost allocations, but more specifically statewide cost allocation plans, and how those are reviewed, how they're prepared and submitted, how they're reviewed, and the process and timeliness of that review, because it has an impact on the state's ability to update its own costs to reflect what it's experiencing in the marketplace. So that's my wish list.
All right, there we go. Raphael, take us home.
I mean, just to echo a lot of the great stuff that's been said, just to add to that though, the issue that we run into is a lot of the conflict with county systems and processes, and then the new uniform guidance. And the old policies weren't necessarily reflective of the old uniform guidance, but really those, when the uniform guidance appears to be telling you to do one thing and county policies say you should do another thing, how do you deconflict those? How do you rationalize those? How do you even functionally do what's required within the uniform guidance within our systems? My staff and I spend a lot of time training folks of, okay, this is what the requirement is, but then they have to walk them through step by step. This is how you actually pull that data out of BI. This is how you actually follow that. This is how you actually integrate that into your contract. So the amount of time and effort of kind of bridging these two systems and how we do things really is exhausting. But it's, again, if we want federal money, we have to play by federal rules. So that is, there's no just option there. I think the things we'd like to see, just again, echoing a lot of this, but we'd really like to see more training, more resources for novices. We, again, as Montgomery County is, seasoned government professionals who never had to work with federal grants before because we never needed them or we weren't applying for them. Now we are. We need those kind of people coming in with no background at all in federal grants. How do we bring them up to speed? How do we get them educated? That's something my office works with. But if there are more resources out there and the field guide is going to be great, that's going to be something, because there's an entire generation who just don't have the experience that a lot of others do who have worked with federal grants, and they need to be brought up to speed.
Raphael, we can tell that you are the county. That means you've got both federal and then state requirements. So this idea of deconfliction is so important. And it starts with some language you all used previously. Be clear and be direct, because at least you know where the conflicts are. And then perhaps the chain can tell you what takes primacy in terms of expectations.
And if I can just put an example on that,
Please.
the automatic pass down of requirements to the subrecipient, we are the subrecipient from state money, the state of Maryland, for a lot of things. And we do often see that requirement of the federal grant that they've got, or the federal rules, are different from what the state says we have to do. So by making it simpler, having that direct pass down of the rules, I think makes it a lot easier for us to not have to deal with regulations that seem to come out of nowhere.
Right.
From our perspective.
Okay, well, that was a very impressive list, everyone.
To get it all down.
I got most of it.
Others
I got most of it. I had a little coffee today, so I'm writing encryptedly, so I hope I can read it later. But we heard a lot about change management, about how changes in guidance then has all sorts of consequences and implications for systems development, for people development. There are a couple of areas, though, I'd like to push on. And one of them, and Stacy, we're going to lead with you on this one. You mentioned subrecipients several times, because they are so important as part of the value chain of delivering the public good. Tell us more about how that relationship is working for you. And then we're going to go to our other colleagues.
So what we found in Ohio is, one, building grant capacity, because like Raphael was saying, it's, when you pass through funding, folks, they're government employees. A lot of times it's our townships, our cities. Their job is not necessarily grants, but now grants is becoming a larger part of their job, especially with the infrastructure funding, where people who traditionally didn't get grants before, but now all of a sudden have grants, and they don't realize what NAPA is, or they don't understand all of the requirements like Davis-Bacon that go along with that. So that's where in Ohio, we have the Ohio Grants Partnership that can kind of be that resource. If you do have a question, one, we do a grant summit every year with training. We'll occasionally do webinars with training, but we have an email box, so you can reach out to us and ask us any grants compliance question, and we can try to help you navigate that. Or if you're looking for connecting with someone on a grant or finding a grant. But I think we talk a lot about in the grants community, the underserved folks, and getting to them and getting the funding to them, but we fail to realize they don't have the grant capacity to take it. And I was just reading an article the other day that the U.S. Department of Agriculture was doing a pilot with Michigan on AI to help, locals apply for grant funding. And I thought that was fabulous, because a lot of these underserved communities, they just struggle. Like we offer technical assistance for grant applications for our local governments, because they just struggle how to get started. They struggle having another eye on it, making sure that they're meeting all of the metrics so that when they fill it out, that the federal government is looking through and determining that, yeah, this is a competitive project. And if they hadn't, hit all of the criteria that's scored, they might not, have the same project, but might not get scored well enough to be funded. So we try to help the locals to bring in dollars, but we can't forget, once we do that, which I think that process that U.S. Department of Agriculture is doing is awesome. I think it would be great to have that more across the nation, but it doesn't stop at the grant award. And that's one of the things that I have been, going around Ohio. I speak at the County Commissioners Association conferences and the Municipal League and the MORTCs, like the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning. Like I try to get to all of the organizations around Ohio and do presentations just on Grants 101, grant compliance, to help folks understand and that they know that they have somewhere to turn to. And I know that there's been a lot of We talked about technical assistance earlier. I think Raphael brought it up. With the boot camp and stuff, like there are some federal agencies doing a great job with technical assistance. I just think that that just needs to be more. And we need to promote that more to get to those underserved communities because they don't have the bandwidth to take it on. But they're the ones that are the most in need.
Right. Most in need and least capable of
Right,
handling.
right.
Yeah. Raphael, I'm going to go to you next because you are, as you said, often in the position of a subrecipient, and indeed may have subrecipients related to your operation. So tell me about your experience in that area.
We're really just kind of getting into it now. Some departments are HHS, within Montgomery County government is very experienced in federal grants. They're very good at implementing federal grants. They've had a lot of the support and training, and they have some very seasoned folks working there. So in that sense, some of our departments are veterans and they're very good at this. And then you have other departments like the infrastructure money being brand new. Our Department of Environmental Protection is going after grants really for the first time. And they're doing a great job, but it's been a big learning curve for them. So there's an unevenness within county government of who's understands federal granting and who doesn't, and then an imbalance of where the opportunities are, or at least where the opportunities have been recently. So that's been a challenge there of, okay, different the stakeholders we work with within county government to support are at very, very, very different levels. So so in terms of even the technical assistance that we'd want, you know, some of the HHS folks could come here and actively participate in this conversation because they're so deeply entrenched in uniform guidance, whereas we would need a completely different training set for other departments who are just setting their foot in the door.
DOT, HUD, right.
So,
right.
and this is where, again, in terms of the, you know, the IDC de minimis being increased, that was great, and especially for the underserved communities. Because when we translate that down to the nonprofit partners, we've really, and what we've seen a trend in is types of grants that used to be for us to apply for, win, and pass down to a subrecipient. We see a lot of those are now only eligible for nonprofits. They're going around us. And so we're trying to think of ways, how can we build up our nonprofit partners to actually be able to realistically go after a federal grant, win it, and implement it. And some nonprofits can do that, and they're very good at that. But then there's a huge skill gap going from there. I come primarily from the world of international development, implementing federal grants overseas. And I think that was something that we saw a lot of. There's a recognition, if you want to be working with these local organizations in other countries, have them meeting federal requirements, there's a cultural openness on the part of grantors to invest in technical assistance and resources to get people up to that federal threshold. You don't see that enough yet here, where it's just seen as, well, here's the resources they're posted, here's a few workshops and seminars, this should be enough. And I think there really, really needs a much more deeper concerted effort to kind of get these, or if you want to be going right to nonprofits with federal grants, you have to really do more to build them up.
So there are a couple of things you said that resonate. First off is, so if you're a dog and you're chasing after a car, what happens when you catch the car? And both Stacy and you, Raphael, talk about that. Like, oh, we got the grant, now what? So, so John, I hand it off to you then, this question. How is it that programs in the federal government deal with the now what? I mean, there is always been a push, and I was at a granting organization for some time. There's always a push to get the money out, and that is just the beginning of our relationship. So talk to us a little bit about that.
Okay, so I'll talk to you about the Department of Veteran Affairs Cemetery Grants Program. We've funded about, I think we got 24 grantees. They're all states. We don't really have any sub-grantees or sub-recipients of any kind. We did have a DOE, right? We had 59 formula grantees with about 1,000 sub-grantees throughout the country. And, you know, like I said, at the Veteran Cemetery Program, we don't have sub-grantees. The states may or may not have got a cemetery grant program maybe a couple of years ago, but maybe not in the last 20 years, right? So you're working with people that are brand new and stuff. So our project, I got to be careful of the terminology. The project managers, because I was project officers at DOE. So the project managers are architects, and they work. It's a really unique program at the cemetery, because those project managers will work with the state representatives to actually they give them what's called, they submit a pre-application and then they get a grant opportunity, not a grant opportunity. Then for about 6 months, the program manager will work with the state to actually physically design the construction of whatever they're going to create. And when I first got there, I said, these things are cooperative agreements. These things aren't grants. I mean, 6, 8 months that our guys are involved with them. We don't transfer the money until the drawings are about 95 to 100% done. So there are a lot of challenges working through that. Some states want to just take off and do it, right?
Right.
And it's like, whoa, 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 put on the brakes. And there are other states like, where do I start? So we have project managers that walk them through the process. We have kickoff meetings. We're in the process of doing multiple kickoff meetings now, and we just help them through the process. My part is basically the payments and making sure that they get registered in the various systems. HHS PMS, we use that. We use another system for another type of product that they can use from us, purchase or get reimbursed for. So we use another financial system for that. But my part is to help them through the financial process and get them paid. Right?
Well, what's so great about that is you're meeting your grantee where they are.
Right.
And
Doing the best
sometimes
we
you got to hold them back a little bit if they're moving out there. Right,
Yeah.
right. So there are two other areas I'd like to touch on. We talk a lot about the process and what policy allows us to do. I'd like to explore with you all the concept of outcomes and how does that factor in to the work that you do, or how is it that you capture ways of describing a benefit in measurable terms such that you can share it with other stakeholders? So let's start with you, Stacy.
I don't know that I have a good answer to that.
All right.
Because I feel like, well, in Ohio, we developed, I mean, I feel like performance metrics and determining outcomes is somewhat something that's not done well yet. And I hate to say that, but I think it is across the board. In Ohio, we started, we have something called the Data Ohio portal, which is where we collect a lot of data elements across multiple state agencies, and like infant mortality and a lot of different just data elements. You know, if you're the BMV or you're the Department of Health, or we're putting those that are public data elements kind of into one place so that people can start to see if there are changes to that. So you can start mapping data together and determining if there really you are receiving the outcomes that you intended. If you got funding for maybe infant mortality, are you starting to see some of those rates actually improve based on those programs? I feel like we're still in some infancy stages. I think there's maybe some state agencies that do this really well for their specific programs. My background, it used to be in the FEMA grant world. You always had a cost benefit analysis, and so I feel like that was always done pretty well with those types of grants. But in some of the other grants that are not as specific as maybe doing a mitigation project after a disaster, I don't think that we've connected quite well with that yet across the board.
So we've got opportunity here.
We do have an opportunity. That's why we have the field guide.
That's right.
We can talk, we can learn on how we can connect to this better.
Yeah, so let's toss that over to you, Perry. How do you see an integrated data system or a integrated funding source for data systems that meet multiple programs supporting the need and the desire for the public to see the benefits of their investment?
Oh, I think it's absolutely critical to being able to see that, because the public isn't interested in how many widgets got purchased in order to complete the FEMA recovery. What they're interested in is, did all the businesses come back to Main Street and open their doors after an emergency? And so that's the outcome measure, right? It's not how many widgets did FEMA reimburse for. So I think one of the things these integrated systems can do can actually help build the context for the public in understanding what the actual impact of spending has been and what actual outcomes have been purchased.
Thank you. So, Raphael, I tell you, the county is where work gets done, right? Your programs are meeting people where they live, literally. How do you all deal with the challenge with outcomes, both in how you spend your money and in how you deliver service?
I mean, again, building on the great responses before, I mean, I think we're still getting there. We are working on building a data. We have a platform called Data Montgomery, where we post all sorts of public data and then implementation of our programs. You know, again, most of that has been county funded opportunities, but it does kind of miss that outcomes piece of telling that story and telling that narrative, or demonstrating that what we did 2 or 3 years ago, here's the outcomes that come out now. I think that's something as we try to build our own grantor systems and how we want to collect data. That's something we struggle with, is how we want to collect that outcomes data, or how we want to work towards it. And again, working with nonprofit partners who are even farther behind than us often in how to do that, or even have the staffing to do it, even if they know how, I think is really part of this, the struggle. We've invested a lot of money. We'll be bidding it out and for programs soon in terms of providing more technical assistance to nonprofits. But kind of the bone we've been throwing them is, you guys got to learn this stuff well, because if we are successful in bringing more federal funds to support these programs, they're only going to go to you if you know how to do this data and evaluation. And just one other thing to add, that I think a good benefit, and I can only describe it as a tonal shift with the updates to uniform guidance, where there's an emphasis, yes, please do put money in data and evaluation. I think that's so important, because we, again, with people reading tea leaves and NOFOs and what they can and can't ask for, they often have felt like, well, we can't put money into that. That's going to be looked poorly on if we're putting all this money into data and evaluation. So this tonal shift of, yes, please do put money into the data and evaluation, actually invest that in your program, I think is very, very important. It'll send a very positive signal to us, as well as to our nonprofit partners, that this is something they should be investing in, and the grantor will support you putting money into those efforts.
All right. So 2 final questions, but we're running out of time. So if you could just give me a pithy, short answer. The first question is, what one resource would you recommend for our community online here to go to when it comes to how you implement policy? It could be state, federal, local, public advocacy. What resources do you use doing your job? Let's make it a little less cumbersome as a question. So
That's a loaded question.
well, you just get one, and you.
I'm gonna burn that time for us.
I got a question after that too. So yeah. So John, let's start with you. Is there a resource you go to that helps you get your job done?
Well, the resource that I delve into more than anything else is 2 CFR 200. Reread it every single time, right?
All right.
Yeah, don't do it from memory. Go in there and figure it out, right? Because it's important, because the individual. I was in a class one time and a guy said, and he'd been doing this for 20 years, and every time we asked a question, he said, well, let's go back to 2 CFR 200, look down the table of contents, see what applies, and then read that section.
All right.
And that's what I would
Live it,
recommend.
learn it, love it.
Absolutely.
All right. Stacy, is there a resource that you all use that's helpful?
Yeah, I'm gonna throw out the NGMA since I'm on the board of directors.
All right.
So, yeah.
Gotta get
No,
the
but
plug
I
in.
I
Yeah.
would say probably CFO.gov, the COFFA section right now is probably the largest resource folks should be going to. I've used that spreadsheet a lot on all the changes, which I think's been super helpful.
Great. Perry?
I'm gonna ditto that.
I'm sorry, you can't do that. You're gonna come up with something. No, I'm just kidding. You
No.
can do that.
I'm gonna ditto that on NGMA, but also on the guidance that OMB has provided
Yeah.
at the CFO.gov website. There's some very informative extra sheets that explain the changes and why they're in there.
Great.
It's very helpful.
Excellent. Raphael?
I'm excited for the field guide, and even if it's draft version, of just getting it, even what is really a much more accessible document, having an even simplified version of that, being able to pass that around to my colleagues and who are new to this and have them be able to reference it. So excited when that is finalized, but even in draft form, it's gonna be great.
All right, last question, magic wand question. What one thing should the government do differently to make your lives easier in supporting the public good? One thing? Let's go with you, John.
One thing, huh? I've been advocating for 3 things: reduced administrative burden, interact with the grantees as strategic partners rather than contractors, because there seems to be some government issues there, and everybody probably shake your head. And work with CIPRITS in a cooperative and supportive environment. They're our strategic partner. We can't get our job done unless they get their job done. We
That's
need to
right.
encourage that.
We're not doing them a favor. We are partnering.
We're
That's
partners
exactly
with them, right?
Yep.
And a lot of people don't understand that. That's my,
All right.
that's my challenge.
Stacy?
All right, well, I agree with all three of those, and then letting states kind of have a seat at the table to help as you guys are navigating. We're in the same boat. We're trying to strategize and become more efficient and streamline across the state. And we see a lot of challenges even with our local partners, and we would love to kind of be part of the solution as things are worked out.
Excellent. Perry?
I'm actually going to turn to technology. I think we need to think about how we are using technology creatively to allow that partnership to occur with ease. And the example I'm going to give you is the ARPA reporting, which requires 103 different data elements every quarter. And yet the federal government wants every single of the 60,000 recipients of that money to develop their own way to come up with that reporting. And had we had one tool, one Excel tool that everybody could use, life would have been much easier for many of the smallest grantees. So it's super important to
Right.
think about.
Standardize where it makes sense.
Standardize.
Yep.
Yep.
All
And for
right.
monitoring.
Yep.
Raphael?
Again, great suggestions. Enforcement of uniform interpretation of the uniform guidance. I think again, that can be, I mean, now we're struggling a little bit with, are we using the old guidance? Are we using the new one?
Yeah.
And how do you even interpret those? So making sure, because that becomes a barrier between different departments or veterans mentoring and coaching other departments is like, well, this is what HHS does. DEP or EPA might think about things differently. I think that is going to be important, is really making these things uniform and how they're interpreted and implemented. That's going to make things a lot easier for all of us.
Well, I want to thank Raphael for being the last person in the line of questions, so I didn't get out of order, which puts you at the hardest position. But thank you all for your comments. Really appreciate it. We're going to move into an open forum component where we're going to hear from folks from the internet.
Yeah, well, before we do that, we have two more questions for polling for the CPE compliance aspect. Question number 7. Did today's panel provide a good variety of perspectives to help make the content more informative and relevant to all? All right. Do we have a resounding yes? Yes. I guess I have.
It's kind of hard to do that.
Well, actually, could we have benefited from additional perspectives? Was there a perspective that you would have liked to have heard from so we can improve on next time? Yeah.
So I really thoroughly appreciated everything that was said today, prior to this panel and in this panel. I think it's being recorded, so I'm gonna have to go back and listen specifically to various things. There are things that we had best practices on historically as a government entity. I've been in the government too long, I guess. And I think we let it drop a little bit. There's always changeover, retirements, et cetera. But I think we need to pick some of them back up again, look at some of those older best practices. However, your question about what other perspective could have been maybe brought into this or can in the future is the IT technical people that actually do have expertise in the automated data softwares and like, for instance, we're very much at our agency into robotics, process automation, artificial intelligence, blockchain, distributed ledger. So when you listen to some of these concerns and challenges and opportunities, my mind immediately was going, we can do that.
Exactly.
We can do that. Or we can do that even across the government, or we can make that, you don't even have to do that. We can go through your 60,000 data elements quickly, and we can get what we need on our side, like, so that you don't have to do it. So I think bringing that technology expertise to the table to talk about some of what was brought up today will be very helpful in the future.
That is great. Thank you. Do you mind me asking what agency you're from?
Interior.
Interior. All right. Thank you. We'll call on you next.
You can.
We will.
He's the co-chair.
There you go.
We're there.
Awesome. All right.
No apology necessary.
Question number 8. Are you interested in attending a future GMS event on another impactful and relevant grants topic? Yes, maybe in the future, not right now. Yes. Let's see. Yes. All right. I don't need to poll any further. All right. With that, we do have questions from the audience as well as virtual. That wasn't the raised hand, was that? All right. I am going to hand it over to Miles because I can't read his handwriting here.
It's been rough and I've heard that since the third grade. So I'm sticking to a laptop for everyone's ease. So bear with me on this, try and keep the questions fair. There will be some that we were going to skip over and get to with emails later on, simply because they're more appropriately answered there. Going back to de minimis first, we have 3 questions around it. So first, is de minimis go into effect on October 1st, 2024 or October 1st, 2025?
It's 2024.
All right, so simple one there.
Yeah, I do want to reference a topic that my colleagues here have obliquely touched upon, and that is the HHS implementation. So HHS had its 2 CFR 200 policy in a different part of the regulation. And only recently have we been brought back into the fold. Now that that work has been hard to ensure that the $900 billion of HHS funds could be transferred over in a way that the operating divisions had time to implement this process. So HHS is on we've adopted 2 CFR 200, but we're on a 2-part implementation. The first part was the immediate 2024 implementation of the threshold related flexibilities. And the rest of the document is October 1, 2025. Now, that means we're going to be in an ugly 10 months right now to make that bridge while all of the operating divisions at HHS can update their policies. So we will be fully back in the fold as of October 1st, 2025. And I want to thank you all for not calling me out directly, but for turning it into a fake compliment, which I appreciate. No, I know. I understand. So we are the largest federal agency in the financial assistance community, and we understand that our role is to be a leader. And this is a way in which we're stabilizing our organization and then moving forward. And so I want to thank you all for your support and your patience as we get our dynamic policy environment in place. So that is underway.
Can I add something to that? Because there's confusion sometimes in Ohio, at least, where people think as of October 1 of 24, you can now start using 15%. And that is not the case. There are new awards or amended awards after October 1st of 20.
That is correct.
So if the federal agency allows to adopt or that, then it's potential you can move on to 15. You just can't just move on to 15. The other thing that folks at states don't realize is if you do get an amended award to allow for this increased de minimis, you need to pass that through to your subrecipients. So you need to amend all of your subawards. So that is another key thing that I've seen a lot of confusion on.
Yeah.
Sorry, I want to just clarify.
No, I appreciate that. I appreciate that because that's what this panel's for.
Well, I thought that was a short question, but I appreciate
No,
the long answer.
sorry.
Some critical
Sorry.
details
Yeah.
there. Sticking with de minimis for 2 more quick questions. One, can existing grantees with a current NICRA switch immediately to de minimis? I'm assuming based on what I just heard that you need to verify and that it's new or amended grants.
If you have a negotiated rate, I don't believe you're allowed to use a de minimis.
Yeah.
And earlier, I believe there was a question about, and I might be a little out of school on this one, about whether a state or local could use de minimis. And my read, and someone on this panel can correct me if I'm wrong, if you receive 35 or expend $35 million or more in federal funding, you're not allowed to use the de minimis. So I don't want states out there thinking they can all of a sudden start using 10% or 15%, because we have agencies that are trying to use de minimis and they can't.
Correct.
Stacey, I don't know how but you somehow read my mind for the next question on de minimis. So we're on the same page. All right. So getting a little bit more into a sort of higher level thinking here, how do you measure outcomes? so many of these programs talk about outputs. Yeah.
So I think the trick is to start with the biggest picture and to then disaggregate down the contribution that the individual act is trying to achieve. So an example would be homelessness. We're trying to reduce the amount of homelessness. Well, that is your outcome. There are 400, 500, 600 different ways to do that. And what governments do is they put out requests for people to come up with interesting ideas to figure out how to move that big number. So that's the outcome, the public good. The trick is, how do you then tie that particular outcome, reduce homelessness, down to where the work is actually happening? Because homelessness may be an issue of mental health. It may be an issue of the high cost of housing. It may be the issue of job training. And all of those elements contribute to reducing homelessness. So you have to keep your eye on that big outcome, but then you have to have line of sight about how your work is contributing to that greater outcome. It's a cascade, if you will.
Can I piggyback off that a little bit? Because I do see a lot of times folks chase dollars and try to fit a square peg into a round hole just so they could get dollars. So I do think that governments in particular should be looking at what are their problems, kind of keeping a catalog of things that they would like to do, economic development projects, partners that they've already connected with, things that could support their community, have kind of that stack of ideas where it would make meaningful outputs and outcomes to their community, and then find the grant dollars that they maybe competitively applied for that fit. I feel like sometimes people chase the dollars and then they make it fit, and you're not going to get performance outcomes if you're going the opposite direction. So I do think that is a difference in approach that I have been encouraging local governments within Ohio to start thinking through. Like, stop chasing the funding, figure out what your problems are and what outcomes you want to achieve, and then find the funding.
Yeah. And then push it down to where the work's getting done, so you know what you're delivering as part of that bigger portfolio of solutions, which is really the way the government works.
Yeah, I just want to add one last thing, which is, for the questioner on this topic, a place to go for an understanding of this is resultsforamerica.org, and they have a lot of resources on performance measurement.
All right.
Thanks, Perry. Look at you following up on the resources. Wonderful.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
Always good to have more resources available. So completely different direction here. Are there any recommendations from the panel on partnering with faith-based organizations? Any type of guidance on how to support this subset of novice grant applicants?
Let's start with the county and go up from there.
It's a challenge. Because these are, technically nonprofits, but they don't have the same type of nonprofit infrastructure that, say, a homelessness nonprofit might have. But they're deeply involved in their communities. In Montgomery County, we're one of the most diverse counties in America. And so a lot of our community members, when they go to services, they're going to go to their synagogue, they're going to go to their mosque, they're going to go to their church to get a service or get help. And they're going to take that help from that, their religious institution. So we have to figure out a way to work with them. And again, it comes down to building up their capacity, helping them understand to even apply for grants, how to try to measure outcomes, train them how to track these things and do data. It's really an uphill battle because they're not necessarily built to be service providers, and some of them have evolved to the point where they have a kind of a partner nonprofit that operates like a nonprofit providing services. But again, because of the huge diversity that we have in Montgomery County, you've got to work with a lot of just faith-based institutions that are just purely faith-based institutions. Because if you're not serving them through that institution, you're not serving that population. So that is something we're actively working on, but I don't think I think again, just slowly building them up to the point, helping them understand that if you want our money, or if you want federal money, you really, really have to build into this infrastructure of becoming a more active or solid organization, or else the money is going to get cut off.
All right, let's go to the state.
So I do think there's a reason why the uniform guidance revisions added community engagement, right? I think community engagement should be stronger when folks are figuring out where they need to fund. I also think, again, like back to my last comment, we're not chasing funding. We're figuring out our problems. We're building partnerships within our community. And once you build those partnerships, you recognize there might be this faith-based organization that can get this done. They're the boots on the ground and they lack capacity. So maybe you look for fixed amount subawards or some easier approaches to try to fund them to get that work accomplished, or maybe it does require more technical assistance. So I do think community engagement is pretty critical in doing that, not even knowing if you're ever going to be funded. Of course, we all lack bandwidth. And I think even when you get further down into the local government space, it becomes even harder. But I do think that can help as, you know, you understand the problems with your community, you've engaged them, that when you do see funding come available, you've got like 45 days to apply. You're already positioned to do that. You already have your partners engaged.
All right, John. You are a Fed rep, my friend.
I am. At the Veteran Cemetery Grant Program, we're required by policy, our grantees can only be territories, states, or federally recognized tribes. So that's what we're restricted to by policy. At DOE, I was a project manager over there, and we had 18 innovative innovative energy projects many years ago, 2013, I think. I had 18 of those, and I don't know if any of them were faith-based, but that was DOE's, position, try and reach out, do something, right? But I don't know if we had any faith-based.
So it really goes back to meeting them where they are, given their unique position in our society, and then building their capacity, maybe a higher touch relationship, given that they've got potentially farther to go. All right.
Fantastic. Want to pause real quickly, just in case our audience does have any questions here in person. We've largely skipped over you. Go ahead, Robert.
So there's been a lot of meaty stuff discussed and hopes and aspirations enumerated. What do you see the role of the Academy and this symposium playing in helping you track and make progress in those areas for you, Dale?
Well, for me, it's just having an opportunity for different stakeholders to say it to each other in a non-charged collegial environment. So just, even if we don't have the answers, just asking the questions helps create community, and it helps move us into a solution development mindset. So we must have heard 24 different magic wand or opportunities or improvements out of here. And there are a number of people online, I'm sure, were like, yeah, I was thinking the same thing. So being able to use this forum to amplify, and then being able to use something like the National Academy for Public Administration to actually do additional research in these areas, and to support things like the Integrated Data System Field Guide, which goes beyond the dialogue and community into actual tools. So that's how I see that. You all have thoughts?
We agree.
All right. Thanks, Robert. Appreciate the question. All right. Anything else online?
We have a couple others that we only, I think, have time for about one. So let's go with this particular one. I'm going to try and capture the nuance here because there's some acronyms that I am not personally familiar with, but we're gonna try here. So this attendee still finds FSD and SAM.gov guidance to state and local governments related to their organizational hierarchy and associated UEI assignments, lacking a little clarity. Apparently, okay, all right. So so they're asking, is this concern that's something, in line for improvement? For example, is a UEI required for each department of a county or city, or is it required just for a local,
This is the state of Ohio question.
All right, go ahead.
Michael Miller, I hear you. So,
we know who you are. We're looking at you right now, Michael Miller.
So, this has been an issue in the state of Ohio. So traditionally, so when we moved over to the UEI, in the previous DUNS format, there was a hierarchy where states were kind of the parent, and we had all of our state agencies as children, and we could track what was going on and track all of the DUNS relationships. And when we transitioned to UEI, that went away. So as we slowly transitioned, there was no longer a parent-child relationship. They kind of went away. We lost track of what our state agency partners were doing. And then we struggled with state agencies actually politically being separate and getting their own UEI as an agency because we all shared the same TIN, and that still continues to be a struggle with renewal.
TIN being taxpayer
Yeah.
ID number.
Yes, yeah, and I'm using acronyms, I don't mean to. So unique entity identifier. So where it's a challenge too, from the state perspective, is we're required to do single audit monitoring. And in doing that, we use the Federal Audit Clearinghouse and we monitor such as our counties, and we figure out you know, what our county's single audit looks like. And where we're running into trouble is there is no guidance, at least not to my knowledge, and we've not been able to find it, that really defines when you should have a UEI. And we're seeing counties, and this was a problem with DUNS, where the sheriff department at a county might have been the first one to go out and get a DUNS number. And so now the county just uses that DUNS number across, and then when it transitioned to UEI, they're just using the new UEI. And it says such and such county sheriff's department, but it might be a grant from HHS. And it looks like the sheriff's department is using it. And then when it comes over to USA spending, it looks strange. So there is no identification as to if you are one political subdivision, you should have one UEI, or you can have multiple UEIs. If a state, what does that look like with the hierarchy? And so we brought this up prior to the transition to GSA, and it's still an issue because there is really not guidance around when you should get a UEI, who should have a UEI, if you could have multiple UEIs.
Right. So this challenge is a process and technology and policy issue. And
Right.
the transfer to the UEI was extremely important because we were locked in with a particular vendor.
Right.
I don't think anybody in the panel would say that the transfer has been smooth. So
It's getting better.
there are
better.
mechanisms placed at the federal level for technology challenges. Really the only way to go to talk about the UEI policy is OMB. So
Right.
this is the type of thing that if NAPA wanted to do a deep dive on a particular pain point that the community experiences,
I could do it myself.
Robert Shea is going to do it.
I will
himself.
help you.
So
Mr. Michael Miller, well, thank you.
yeah, and the other element there is that federal agencies, and of course you all can submit information to the COFFA. And because if this is a endemic challenge that is impacting all of our portfolios, then
Right.
that's something the COFA is going to be interested in.
It's a transparency issue, right? So it looks like the sheriff's department is getting all of this funding and it's inappropriate, but
Yeah.
it's the same political subdivision.
Right.
But it's because different departments within counties are getting, you know, the UEI, and then they're using it across the entire space.
Yeah.
And it really needs to be fixed.
Got it. All right. Well, on that uplifting note, I certainly want to thank all our panelists today for doing such an excellent job. If we can, thanks for it. I'm going to turn this over to our colleagues over at NAPA to go from there.
This has been a fantastic conversation. So please join me, whether you're online or in person. And again, thanking our wonderful panelists and our sponsor, Cherry Becker, for making this possible. We really appreciate what I've loved about this is that it's been a great conversation about really making grant policy into practice. So kind of from policy to practice we've been talking about. And we want to make sure that this is an ongoing community for everyone here, whether you're joining us in person or joining us online, and look forward to future events. And want to just, again, thank everybody for being here. It's been wonderful. I've learned a lot. Thank you.
Thank you. All right.